afternoon, everybody. Welcome in Pelt, welcome to the fourth edition of our festival, and welcome Martin Parr to join us here in Pelt and to honor us with your visit here. We're very, very happy to have you here, and we are very anxious and very wanted to learn very much about you and everything. We had already some incredible times walking around in Pelt, just having a talk in the cafe, just having a wine together. So thank you very much. I give the word to you because we are very happy to have you here.
Okay, well, thank you. So it's very nice to actually have a real live crowd to do a talk to, because over the last few years I've done far too many Zoom talks where you can't have the same atmosphere. And it's also very nice to be in this very enthusiastic photography festival here. I didn't know about it before I was invited, and I'm impressed with the enthusiasm, the number of pictures around, and the fact that they can gather a crowd as big as this to come and hear a lecture. So I'm going to be talking now for about 53 minutes, and that's exactly the same number of years that I've been working as a photographer. So what I'm going to deliver to you is 1 year per minute. And this image here is the front cover of the last retrospective book that I had published. So in effect, what I'm going to do is talk my way through the images contained within this book. So I was brought up in suburban Surrey. This is the area near to London where people used to commute in. And this is a picture of a commuter on the station going to London. And it's a very boring place. And the great advantage of being brought up in a boring place is everywhere else feels very exciting. And this is my grandfather. And when I was a teenager, I used to go and visit him in Yorkshire in the north of England. And he was a very keen amateur photographer. And it was he that got me excited about photography in the first place. So he gave me a camera, we went out shooting together, processed the film, made prints. So by about the age of 13 or 14, I decided that I wanted to be a photographer. And this is a dedication that he put in a book that he gave me, From Grandad to Martin, hoping he will cultivate a seeing eye for all beauty, line, form, and color, which I hope I've done. And here is my first photo essay, done at the age of about 16. It was a very famous fish and chip cafe in the north of England, and this is the cafe that they had in the takeaway section. And I get my natural obsession, because remember, if you're a good artist, you have to be obsessed. There is no shortcuts. And my father was an obsessed bird watcher, and I went out with him and took photos when he did his bird watching trips. This is the Surrey Bird Club. This is around 1971, 72. And I went to Manchester Polytechnic and studied photography there. And for my diploma show, I created this living room. And this same living room was then transported to the first gallery of photography in the north of England, called the Impressions Gallery. And you can see here an installation shot of how the room looked. You can see it's nice rose wallpaper, lots of kitsch items on the walls. We had a constantly playing tape of The Sound of Music and rose perfume. So it's generally quite an unpleasant room where I was able to show the photographs that I'd taken. And there is much about how domestic things looked in the late 60s, early 70s. And I went and bought some very nasty frames. These are plastic ones, you can see. And as well as that, I had wedding pictures. Because if you go to a living room, you'll often see photographs of weddings. So I decided to photograph Princess Anne getting married on the television, and then put these pictures into my living room. And something else you might see in people's living rooms are plates with photographs on. Think of the Pope or John F. Kennedy. So I went out and photographed these young girls who were fans of the Bay City Rollers. I then printed these pictures, hand-colored them, and then stuck them on inappropriate plates. Now, in 1975, I moved from Manchester to a small town called Hebden Bridge, which is in the north of England, in the very, what we call the Pennines, the very hilly bit between the east and west of northern England. And I stayed here for 5 years. And in that time, I was studying or working at the Albert Street workshop. And as you went into the workshop, on the right-hand side, there was a wall that I used to show the photographs that I'd been taking in Hebden Bridge. So what I would do is constantly change the pictures here, put new ones up, take the old ones down, and people were able to come in and look at the photographs I'd taken in the locality. So here are a few of the pictures from that era. Of course, all these pictures are taken in black and white, because back in the 1970s, if you were a serious photographer, you were almost obliged to work in black and white. Color was thought to be the domain of snapshot photography or commercial photography. This is the Ancient Order of Henpecked Husbands, annual general meeting, and they were like a piss take of the Freemasons. And this is a man cleaning his windows. In fact, currently, French television are doing a film with me, and we went back to Hebden Bridge, and we found the same doorway. It had changed quite dramatically, and so we filmed there, which is fascinating to do. And what I discovered when I went to Hebden Bridge, because here I was trying, if you like, to show the kind of community that I'd come across in the north of England before when staying with my grandfather, one of the things I discovered was the strongest element were these non-conformist chapels. And these are people that aren't Protestant or Catholic. And one of the birthdays of these chapels is called the anniversary. And each of them have an anniversary service. And I went and photographed many of these events. And just 2 weeks ago, I went back to this same Baptist chapel, but the painting had disappeared. And just 5 miles from Hebden Bridge was a small tributary valley, and in this valley there was a small nonconformist chapel called Crimsworth Dean Methodist Chapel. And this was attended by half a dozen farmers and their partners. It was a farming area, and you can see here after the service, people are hanging around, they're all friends. And this community I got to know very well. And over a period of a year, I went up nearly every Sunday and photographed the churches or the chapels, but also went to their homes and their farmsteads and photographed the farming practices as well. This is Charlie Greenwood. He was one of the great characters of this valley. And here they are doing the annual spring clean for the anniversary service. And here's Charlie up in his farmhouse. And the farmhouse was called Thurish. And what was amazing is that every anniversary service, Charlie and his sister, Sarah Hannah Greenwood, would put up curtains in their windows. It was a very isolated place anyway, and this is a luxury they only allowed themselves on the anniversary weekend. And likewise, they also had a hearth rug in front of the fire, just for the anniversary weekend. And I think for me, it was small details like this that I discovered almost by accident that made the work and the engagement with the community so much worthwhile. Here's Sarah Hannah Greenwood at the Thurish Farm. And here she is attending the chapel anniversary service. She would only go to the chapel once a year, in fact, and she would meet a friend that she didn't meet apart from that one afternoon for the anniversary service. And these images were produced in a book that came out about 10 years ago. I couldn't get it published at the time because no one was interested, so I'm very lucky that 35 years after these pictures were taken, I managed to find a publisher. And then I wanted also to do a project that I thought was more conceptual, and I came up with this idea of photographing in and around bad weather. Now, we talk about the weather constantly in Britain, so I thought this is a national obsession that I could exploit. I've also discovered now you talk about the weather in Belgium, because the rain yesterday was on everyone I met. We were talking about how bad the rain was. So I could apply the same project over here. This is an anniversary. This is the Queen's Silver Jubilee anniversary, a washed-out street party. And then I went and bought an underwater camera and an underwater flash gun. And this enabled me to take photographs wherever I liked without worrying about getting water in the lens or water in the camera. So when I went to the camera shop, they said I was the only non-swimmer that had ever bought an underwater camera. And this combination of what we call in the magic hour, just when the light is falling, and the rain and snow, you got these blobs in the images. And this is an accident that I discovered that I wanted to try and exploit and reapply it into the images. And for this project, I also challenged myself to try and think of the most boring places to photograph. So I went to motorway service stations, I went to town city centres, I went to car parks to see, is it possible to get an interesting picture in a very boring place? I also began to realize how subjective photography can be. If you look at this bandstand, taken on a tripod in Halifax, and then here's a picture, the same place, but just a few moments later, taken with flash. So which one is telling the truth? We understand, of course, that the view of the photographer is very subjective, and therefore this inherent quality in photography I wanted to try and adopt into my work a lot more meaningfully. And this was the first book that I published way back in 1982. And since then, I've done over 100 books and edited many other books. Here's just a few of the covers, just to give you an idea. And also with my colleague, my colleague Jerry Badger, we've done 3 books about the history of the photo book. We both decided that the photo book really hadn't been given the status that it deserved in the history of photography. So we started out and did 2 in 2004, and then 10 years later, 2014, we did volume 3. This is the Arles Festival, which is probably the biggest festival in photography probably in Europe, actually, and certainly possibly even the world. And I was the artistic director of this in 2004, and I put on 36 exhibitions, brand new. It's a fantastically exciting opportunity to present the people that I discovered, because I traveled widely, certainly back then, and would often meet interesting photographers and had a chance to show them at the festival. And then in 2010, I did the same with the Photo Biennale in Brighton. So I continue to do, if you like, curating. We have the foundation in Bristol, which I curate together with my team. And also this, for example, is an exhibition I did at the Barbican in London about different photographers that had come from abroad and how they saw Britain. And we're always fascinated to see how other people see us. And that's why that show was put together. And this is a publisher that I work with in America called Nazraeli Press. And Peter Mitchell, this book here, was one of the pioneers of colour photography in Britain, and I had a chance to photograph or to publish his photographs in this book. Now, you must be wondering what this is doing, and I also collect a lot of things, a lot of ephemera and such like, and this all started when I didn't really like Mrs. Thatcher at all. And I couldn't believe that anyone would go out and spend money with a picture of her on a plate or a mug. And perversely, that's the thing that made me start collecting Thatcher memorabilia. And this one is more to my liking. And also, during the festival in Arles in 2004, I did an exhibition of photographs of watches with Saddam Hussein on the front. You can see here an example. That's a fake Rolex. This is an early Saddam picture. And this is much later. So within 2 weeks of his demise, these were available on eBay. And of course, I bought them for the collection. And here, for example, is a vitrine full of Saddam Hussein watches. And another rather perverse, I accept that these are rather perverse collections, but another one that I have is of space dogs. Whoops, come back. And you will recall back in 1957, they sent Laika up. What they didn't tell the Russian public is that Laika died when coming back down to Earth. But then the next ones up, Belka and Strelka, they survived and became national heroes. And you can see them here. And this is, of course, the time of the Cold War between America and Russia. And the Russians were so proud of the fact that they had beaten the Americans with dogs and cosmonauts up into space. They produced a huge range of ephemera, and it's this that I've collected. I'm also fascinated by the whole world of comedy. I think the modern comedians can tell us a lot about the society in which we live. And this is Tony Hancock. You won't have heard of him here, but he's a classic British comedian. And that same vulnerability that he exploits in his comedy is very similar to the vulnerability I see and sort out in society, not only in Britain, but also further abroad. And I just want to show you a few of my influences. This is a photographer called Tony Ray Jones. So when I was at college at Manchester, someone came round and talked to us and showed us work by this British photographer who had shot this America. He'd been to America in the early 60s and then come back to Britain and did a remarkable set of pictures in Britain in the late 60s. I also love the simple postcard. So this is the M1. This is the first motorway built in Britain. It opened in 1959. And when it opened, every service station on the motorway would produce postcards. And people would literally drive onto it just for the sake of it. So I remember being taken onto the M1 when I was about 8 or 10. And now, of course, everyone sort of would never dream of taking someone onto a freeway just for the hell of it. And this is a John Hind postcard. And I was working at Butlins. This is a rather strange thing that we have in Britain. They're like a holiday camp. It's a bit like Disneyland, but obviously much shabbier and very British, so not as exciting. And I saw these, I worked there as a photographer, and I saw these postcards and was very impressed with the color. I was working then in black and white. And also, at the same time, we began to see color photographs coming from America. This is a book done by Sally Auclair that would show these artists such as Stephen Shaw, Joel Meritz. These, of course, now are great classic names in the history of photography. So I think it was this and knowing how the bright postcards of people like John Hind had inspired me that made me turn to color from black and white back in 1982. And for this, I bought myself a medium format camera. They just introduced this thing called a plow bell. It's a 6x7 camera, and I was able to photograph quite quickly and freely, and I'd often have a flash on the top of the camera as well, and this gave me the ability to photograph like this very candidly. And I was living about 1.5 miles away from this resort and decided for the next 3 years I would concentrate and do a series of pictures which turned out to be called The Last Resort. And these, of course, are some of the pictures that you've seen in the foyer here at the Cultural Centre. So here we are on the beach in New Brighton. And what's interesting, when I look back at this time, is that people were very friendly. I would go up, I'd photograph kids. And now, if you photograph kids on a beach, you're likely to get told off. But back in those days, people didn't even think about it. So you can see I've got very close. So people were very friendly, had no problem with me photographing at all. And you can see how much litter there was. I went back to New Brighton about 2 weeks ago, and the litter had gone. It had really gentrified itself. And of course, I'm looking to photograph where the litter is at its worst, because remember that subjectivity thing I told you about? I'm trying to sort of create what we might call a fiction out of the reality of me photographing. And this is the cover of the book, The Last Resort. And for the publication of this book, I published it myself. And I got a small grant from the Arts Council. I then found the writer, the designer, and put the whole package together. And in fact, we still print this book. It's on its 7th edition. The cover's changed, but it's still going strong. And the next project I did in the 80s was something about supermarkets and shopping. It struck me that if you looked at the work of documentary photographers at that time in particular, there were certain subjects that they loved and certain subjects that they just avoided. And for example, the supermarket, which we're all familiar with, was something that people just didn't bother photographing. So I thought it would be interesting to not only do supermarkets, but shops generally. This is M&S. It's a famous store in Britain. And here we are in their food chain. And bang in the middle of the photo there is a piece of broccoli. And broccoli was having a good time in the 80s. It became very popular. So little details like this, I think, are important in terms of the social history of broccoli. And here's a frozen food center. And here's someone filling their car up with petrol. And if I was to tell you this is a subject that you've got to go out and photograph, you say, well, that's so boring. I can't even think about how to do it. But look at this picture here. 30 years later, the petrol pump's changed, the clothes have changed, the car has changed. So suddenly it becomes interesting. And I think this demonstrates the value of documentary photography and how we can look at the world and how it inevitably is going to change. I would suggest, for example, whenever you do up your bathroom or your kitchen or your living room, you should take a photograph of it before you do that. And then you can remind yourself later what bad taste you used to have. And here is a living room. This is a Tupperware party. Tupperware has disappeared in Britain. I don't know if it's here still in Belgium, is it? No one know? Have you all got Tupperware bowls still? Okay. And here's the Tupperware party in full swing. And the final project I did in the 80s was something about the middle classes. And, the middle classes are a very big class. And again, I thought they hadn't been particularly photographed. I was living in Liverpool, which is about the least middle-class city in the whole of Britain. So we moved down to Bristol. My wife got a job as a speech therapist. And I started this 3 or 4 year project about my own class. Here we are in a public school in Bristol. This is the Royal Commonwealth Society function for a summer evening. This is a mother and daughter. And this is an open garden event. So I thought I should also photograph people I knew who'd voted Conservative, i.e. for Mrs. Thatcher. So I got a list of all the different events that they had, and I went to the ones where they were held in private houses. I just liked that as a backdrop. So this is the Bath Young Conservatives Midsummer Madness Party. And here we are at the craft fair. The reluctant wallet coming out again. And this is one of these antenatal classes. In Britain, they're called the National Childbirth Trust. I'm sure you have the same thing here. And my wife was pregnant, so she asked me to come along. I said I'd happily do that as long as I could bring my camera. And here we have a dinner party, one of the big events of the middle classes. And aerobics in the gym. And here's the cover of the book that had these pictures in, called The Cost of Living. This was published in 1989. Now, one of the projects that I've been working on for maybe 40 years now is about tourism, and I've done many books about this. It's called Small World, and I'm just going to show you a few pictures now from this project. Here we are in Pisa. This is in Venice, waiting to get on the gondola. and this is in Las Vegas. It's Venice in Las Vegas. So I like the idea of all these different Venices around the world. And this is Paris in Las Vegas. This is Machu Picchu. We've got this picture out in the lobby as well. And I think what this demonstrates really is this idea of what I was looking to do is the mythology versus the reality. So when we think of a famous tourist location, we have this idea that we're going to go along and go and get straight to see it properly. But when you get there, you'll find that there's many other people trying to do the same thing. Look at somewhere like Venice, where it's completely overrun with people. So here we are at that very famous site in Machu Picchu. And even though I got there at 7:30 in the morning, already there's a queue of people with their groups waiting to go there and have their photograph taken. And here we are in Barcelona. This is this famous dragon in the Güell Park. And there's so many people trying to get to it and photograph it, you can hardly see it at all. And here we have all the different photographers and their smartphones. This is Angkor Wat in Cambodia. This is the biggest outdoor pool or indoor pool, in Japan. It's called Ocean Dome. And this is the cover of the 3rd edition. And you can see here we're at the Louvre looking at the Mona Lisa, which of course is completely mobbed. And here we see some selfie sticks. And what's interesting about the selfie stick, about 10 years ago, you couldn't move for them. Everyone had them, and now they've disappeared. Have you noticed that? So this is in Venice, obviously. And I decided to do a book about people taking selfies. This is in India. And I looked up the Wikipedia entry for death by selfies, and it said that India was the worst country, and I therefore assumed that as there were more people dying from taking selfies, more people were taking them anyway. So I went to India to take pictures of people doing selfies. And the book that I produced was the same shape and size as an iPhone. And here we are in Venice. And this is the Imperial War Museum in London. And here we are back in India on the beach at Goa. Now, in 1995, I decided to go out and buy a macro lens and a ring flash. This is a combination usually associated with medical photography. Basically, you have a flash on either side of the lens, so it's like a portable studio. And I decided to go out and try and photograph food as my first experiment. And I decided to start with British food because British food has a very bad reputation. But in fact, it's dramatically improved. And anyone who goes there now, will be quite impressed by British food. But for the benefit of the French and the Belgian, I wanted to try and photograph the worst examples of British food. So all those old prejudices can be confirmed. So here we are with English sausages. And the next project I wanted to do with this combination was to photograph actual cliches. So I thought of 7 European countries, and I went there and tried to locate their cliches and photograph them. So here we are, starting in Britain. Here we have French snails. And this is in Germany. And Holland. I'm sorry I didn't get around to Belgium. I could have done lots of pictures of, mussels and mash with mayonnaise, for example. And all these pictures came together in this book called Common Sense, which was published in the spring of 1999. And at the same time, I decided to try and get the set of pictures out there in as many galleries as possible. We sent a complete set of 350 laser scans. And I think we got 45 galleries to agree to do it. And this is, for example, what it looked like in Rome. And this just demonstrates that we got to places like Africa. So we actually got a Guinness Book of Records award for having the most photographic exhibition in different locations in 5 continents around the world at the same time. And here are some of the pictures from the Common Sense project. This is in Benidorm. This is back in Las Vegas. It's one of those breakfast buffets. And that, by the way, is an apricot on some cottage cheese. It's not an egg. And the watch says, "I love bingo." This is in Florida. And here we have an ashtray. This is in Los Angeles Disneyland. And here we are in Tokyo Disneyland. And here we are on the beach in Florida again. Now, I guess the subject that I photographed most of all in my career, and the one I've become most interested in, is photographing in Britain and in England. And I decided to take this same combination of lens and flash and photograph outside and look for sort of English cliches, if you like. And these are some of the pictures that came into a book that was published about 20 years ago now, called Think of England. And here we are at Ascot. You can see how dated it is because the phone there has an aerial. Remember aerials on mobile phones? No longer with us. This is back on the seaside again, which I've always been interested in. This is in Weymouth. And this is in Eastbourne. I'm a great believer in socks and sandals, so this is like a self-portrait. And these are tea cozies. I don't know if you know what that is. Basically, it's a coat for a teapot. I have to explain it when I'm not in Britain, what a tea cozy is. Hand-knitted tea cozies. And here we are on the beach in Brighton. I like the fact that we're a multicultural country in Britain. Now, I've done lots of books. I've already told you this. I thought I'd just show you one book in particular. And what it will demonstrate, if you like, is how the content of the book reflects itself in the production design to help bring across the whole idea. So this is playas. That's obviously beaches. And these are pictures I've taken in Latin America over the years. So I've often gone there and photographed in our winter, but their summer. And I spoke to my Mexican friend who was a publisher and said, I'd like to do this. And he helped me to get the right people in place. So he went down to this area in Mexico City where they make wedding invitations and books and such like. And he found a few designers, and he gave it to the designers with some of my pictures in, and to see what they would come up with. And here we have what we thought was the worst example. It's where, if you have a photographer and they have a nice picture, the last thing they want is trashy graphics all over it. But in this case, we decided that would be welcome. We wanted to have the book have a sort of junk novel type of feel to it. And then we found a very bad printer. And we said to them, print as many as you like with different colors. And here you can see they forgot to put the yellow through, so it's all gone blue. And likewise, here we have double printing on the left, single printing on the right. So this became really the worst book I've ever photographed or ever produced, which is why I still like it. And this is Mar del Plata. Mar del Plata, in case you didn't know, is the biggest resort probably on the planet. It has 200 hotels. It's enormous, 17 kilometers long. And this is Bristol Beach in Mar del Plata. So, of course, I feel at home because I live in Bristol. Now, in 2019, I did a big exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery called Only Human. I'm just going to show you a few pictures from this particular set right now. That's the cover of the catalogue, and here we are in the foyer. And halfway through the exhibition, I decided to build a cafe, and around the cafe they had my pictures of food, and you would be able to buy a cup of tea and a piece of cake, the very traditional thing you have mid-afternoon in England. And normally at the National Portrait Gallery, they have photos of famous people, but I wanted to have photos of ordinary people, which is what I persuaded them to do. So one of the rooms, or two of the rooms, in fact, had ordinary people in. I did have a celebrity room as well, but I'm not going to show you that because these are more interesting as photographs. So this is Norman with his prize leak. And this lady here lives in Germany, and she has a tea party in honor of Princess Di every month and has different people coming, her friends, who are obsessed with Princess Di. And she comes over every year to England and does a tour to her where she used to live and her estate. This is in Atlanta. This is Gay Pride there. And these are two Muslim ladies running a fish and chip shop in England, which of course is our most traditional food. So I like the fact that it's being run now by these Muslim ladies. And the next room that I want to show you a few pictures from is the one about dancing. I just love this idea of we've had a few drinks and you hear the right music, we just invariably get up and start dancing. And that sort of natural urge I wanted to show. And here is some students with their graduation party. This is in Manchester. It's a 21st birthday party. That's the mother of the person who was 21. Here we are in New York at a bar mitzvah. This is Gay Pride in Manchester. And this is at the Whitby Goth Festival. And the next section I wanted to show you is something about the establishment in Britain. Here we are in Germany at a British Army camp, and it's the Queen's birthday celebrations. And here's a buffet from the same camp. This is an English GI. And this is a public school. They wear this very traditional uniform. They look like monks. And this is Harrow. When you meet a member of staff in the street, you have to put your finger up as a mode of recognition. And this is Harrow's, one of these strange games they play. It's like a hybrid between rugby and football. It's very muddy, as you can see. And here's the captain after the match. And then 30 minutes later, here he is again. Here he is shown as the head of the camp that he's part of. And this is the mayor of London. This is the city of London, as opposed to the whole of London. There are two mayors that we have. And this is part of the livery companies that exist in London. They're very old-fashioned. They're like a cross between a trade union and Freemasonry. This is the Lord Mayor's parade. And this is the Queen. She's probably the only person you can recognize from the back. This is her attending a livery lunch. And the Queen, and now the King, owns all the swans on the River Thames. And every year she sends two livery companies out to do a check on the new cygnets, the new baby swans, to make an inventory of how many swans are actually alive and well on the River Thames. And at the end of the day, they do a toast to the Queen. Here we are, Oxford University. That's the Chancellor with his page boy running behind him. And this is the actual Vice-Chancellor. These are, of course, this is the person really in charge of the university. And I photographed the May balls. This is one of the balls at 2 a.m. when they're serving pizza. And this is 5 a.m. So when you do your exams at Oxford University, you have to wear your gown and you have to wear a carnation And when you wear a pink carnation, it means it's your first exam. And then when you're doing a continuing examination, you wear a white carnation. And then when it's your final exam, you wear a red carnation. And as you come out of the back of the building, you're met by your friends and colleagues who spray you with Prosecco, foam, and generally they do what's called trashing. And then, of course, they have to wash off in the River Cherwell. Now, in the NPG show, I had a section about Britain now, which is under, we just passed the laws, meaning that we're going to leave Europe, and of course about Brexit. I was very pissed off about this because, I was a very strong Remainer. And of course, Brexit's been a real disaster for the country, but we can't, sadly, turn back the clock. And this is the area in the West Midlands, probably the most nationalistic area in the whole country. And they have a St. George's Day, that's the patron saint of England, in April, and this is some pictures from that. And here's one of the very enthusiastic supporters of British nationalism. And here we are in the Black Country. This is an area that used to be known for making chains. This is one of the few chain makers left. And 50 years ago, there were 70 people working here. Now it's a father and son doing 3 days a week. So you can see how the traditional industries have declined. This is the queue for Lord's Lord's cricket matches. And we always have behind us the threat of Europe with their strange foods. And here we are on the beach in Cornwall looking out and red for danger as we look out onto the continent. So in 2017, I set up the Martin Parr Foundation, and the main aim of this was to collect and to show and give a platform to other British documentary photographers that I thought had been really underappreciated. And luckily, I've had the money to give to the foundation, so we bought this building in Bristol, and we have a program of talks and exhibitions and a bookshop and all these other things. That's the outside, and here we are inside the gallery. This was a very good Scottish portrait photographer we were able to show. And this is an exhibition where the Magnum photographer David Hearn, who lives very near to us, swapped his images with other photographers and thus created a remarkable set of prints by doing the swapping with other photographers, which is, it really worked very well. And here's our bookshop. Now this table is absolutely bursting with books. This is early days. So please do go to Martin Parr Foundation site and subscribe to, you can see the newsletter. We have a membership scheme. For example, if you pay £125, you get to send a signed Martin Parr print every year. This is the one that currently is being offered. So if anyone wants to buy any of the books, you go to the site and they're all signed if they're from me. And if anyone wants a dedication, for example, just let us know in the order and I can fill that in. And we have many talks. Here is David Bailey and David Hearn and myself. And that's the Marketa Luskakova exhibition in the background. And here's a much younger lot of people. This is John Tonks and Rosalind Solomon. And you can see we film all the interviews that we do. I also have a series of sofa sessions. These are on YouTube. This is where I have photographed, I think, 26 photographers. And you can look at those and see and choose the picture, the photographer you want to hear more from. And we have a great book festival, which is coming up in the 8th and 9th of October this year. We have 10 talks. We have 40 publishers, photographers coming. Here, for example, is Stephen Gill's exhibition or bookstall. And, of course, we have a fantastic library where we have all the main British books, all the magazine runs. So we like to think of ourselves as a research centre, and people come down especially to do research on British photography. I'm going to show you a set of pictures now. This is the penultimate set of images that have been censored. You may say, what on earth is this all about? So recently I got a CBE, which is a sort of a thing that the state gives you as a recognition of your achievement. And at the time, it was just after COVID, the palace was very busy. You usually receive your medal from a member of the royal family. And they said, would I mind accepting my medal in Bristol by the Lord Lieutenant, who's the representative of the, back in those days, the Queen and now the King? And I said, no problem. And they said, in return for this, we'll give you 4 tickets to the garden party in Buckingham Palace. So I thought, this is fantastic. This is something I've always wanted to photograph. So I took in a small camera and did lots of pictures on the day. You can see some of them here. And then we wrote to the palace afterwards and said, can I use these pictures? And they said, no, you can't. So basically, I'm allowed to show them, or they don't know that. So if you meet anyone from the palace, please keep this quiet. So I can't publish the pictures, but I can show them in a slideshow. Now, how many people do you think attend? They have 3 garden parties every May. And I'm not asking you to shout out numbers, but most people would think, oh, there's going to be 500 people there. There's 7,000 people at each garden party. This is later. Before this is taken, there'll be massive queues behind. This is where you get your tea and your cake. Again, the typical English, mid-afternoon treat. This is on the way out, and of course a lot of people crowd round. In particular, it was Princess Kathleen who was there giving out the medals, well, not the medals, but meeting, greeting the public. And then finally, this is a project I've done called Autoportrait, and this is really a series of photographs that I've accumulated of me having my photograph taken by different people, different places, different approaches to photography. And I've been doing this now for 35 years, and what we see here are 2 things. First, how photography's changed. Back in the day, when I started, of course, it was all analog, all the film, and now, of course, it's digital. So we've seen this massive transformation of photography in that period of time. And the other thing that you'll see is how I've aged and generally gone downhill. You can see here, the hair is still brown. This, by the way, is the current edition of the Autoportrait project, and it's got a puzzle on the front. You can see those marks around my head. You've got 2 metal balls that you have to get into the center before you're allowed to open the book. So this is one of the very early ones I did in Jamaica. So I would go into a portrait studio and look around and think, I'd love to have a picture like that. So I'd say to the photographer, could you take a picture of me in that style? And they'd always ask me to smile, and I always resisted. So you can see here, I look generally pretty miserable. And this is Studio Hanoi in Havana. And you can see here hand tinting. And this is something that's probably virtually disappeared entirely, except for North Korea. Because here I am with a hand-tinted color photograph that took 6 months to arrive, but it did finally come. This is in Brazil, where they have a tradition of the oil wash on top of the photograph. And this is in Mexico, where we found this guy that manages to carve images and then put them in these frames. And here's another one from that. And then finally, we get into the digital world, and suddenly you can be with anyone, anytime, any place that you like. So here I am in Mexico again. This is at Barcelona. And this is at the World of Coke in Atlanta. So the only limitation now is the imagination of the photographer. So this is one taken in Dubai. And here's another one also from Dubai. I don't know what it means, but it's a great picture. This is in Nairobi in Kenya. And this is in this is in the CNN Center. And this picture here is so bad I look like some kind of crazy East German spy. Here we are in China. And there's a tradition in China that when you get married, the bride and groom go and get this album created. They go in a couple of weeks before the actual event, and they select 4 different uniforms and have their photo taken in that by 4 different photographers and produce a book called Sweet Memory. And here we are. I went in on my own, and here we are. This is one trendy jacket, and here we are more traditional. And this is in Singapore. This is in Lima, and on the beach at Lima, they actually have literally this studio that they wheel round on the beach. So I had to go there and have my photograph taken with that. This is in New York. And this is interesting because this is a photographer who set up a business called Hey Saturday, and she offered to take pictures for your online dating images. And I thought, oh, I must have a go at this. And of course, it's the first time where I was actually, told that I had to smile. So this is why this is the exception to the rule I've just explained before. And then finally, this is a tintype picture. This is when I had my chemotherapy, and my hair first dropped out and then grew out very curly. And therefore, this is a tintype. And that is the last picture. Thank you very much. So if anyone wants to ask a question, I'd be delighted to try and answer that. We've got a couple of roving microphones. Is someone going to volunteer to go around? And have we got any hands up? It always starts with no hands up at all. Yes, let's see. That's who we are. Anyone? Come on, someone's got to be first. There you go. Look, 2 hands already. Hi there.
I myself work in advertising, and we always say we have to be...
So what did you say you worked in?
In advertising.
Oh, advertising, right, yes.
That we have to be change embracing. So when the switch came first from black and white to color, and then from analog to digital, were you change embracing, or were you at first a bit...
I was a bit slow, I have to confess. I think it's only 2008 that I really went over to digital. This is at the same time when the full-frame DSLRs were introduced, so the quality had jumped a huge leap. And it's at that point I thought, this is it, I must try it out. And of course, once you try it, you recognize you never go back, basically. And now what's interesting, we have a lot of the younger generation who are trying to reject all the things digital. And there's been a huge uptake in analog photography. So, film is like ridiculously expensive. But a lot of younger people like to do that almost as a sort of going against the digital sort of, general convention. So, yeah, I changed, a little slow, but once you change, you don't get back. And for me, it's been a huge advantage, especially photographing at night, because you can whip up the ISO to a very high. You can look at how the pictures are looking. I'm trying to get the right combination between the flash and the ambient light, and this gives me a chance to sort of read out immediately what I'm getting, and I can adjust the exposure to get the full blast. So all those pictures of dancing people have been taken in the digital era when it became so much easier. And of course, you've got 500 images on a card or a chip, and back in the day, I had to change film every 10 shots. So it's a massive advantage. There's someone...
Okay. Yep.
Yes, I can. Good idea. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Do people ever get angry with you when you take pictures of them? Because they're not always very flattering.
I think I take pictures of people as I find them. I mean, when you say they're not flattering, you're referring to the fact that all the pictures we see generally in magazines are, basically lies.
Yeah.
If you look at fashion, everyone's young and beautiful. If you look at tourist locations, everything's perfect, blue skies, yellow sand. So I think we're so used to basically digesting these things that are lies. When you see someone doing real pictures of real things, we think they're not flattering. So I would suggest to you that you have to re-examine the language you apply to the images that we generally see. I can give you a good example. I photograph food a lot. If you go into a supermarket and you buy an item of food and it's got a photo on the front, and it all looks really nice, and you look inside, the picture, the thing you get inside, the actual food that you bought, has no resemblance at all to the picture you've got on the outside.
Yep.
So that's a good example of how we are consistently, basically, told lies through photography. So my, quest is to show things as I find them.
I do agree.
Sometimes they're not as flattering as they might be.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much.
I still have a question as well. This week,
Where are you? Wait.
Up here.
Oh.
Here. It's quite far.
Oh,
away.
yes, wow.
There you go.
Right the way back. Yeah, hi.
All right. Now, the question I have is because this week I saw a very nice documentary about your colleague, magnum photographer, Thomas Hupke. And towards the end of the career, he basically said, throughout my whole life, I've basically been looking at cracks in the facade.
Yes.
And he said it's quite difficult for a photographer perhaps to photograph genuine beauty. People tend to have a lot of comment and commentary photography. Do you think it's getting more difficult for photographers to perhaps look at genuine beauty? Because when I see the photos, and I'm a big fan of your work, but I see a lot of irony, I see a bit of sarcasm as well. But do you still believe in genuine beauty in visual photography?
No, I think, for example, I do fashion advertising, and I do advertising. And when I do that, I know that I've got to make things look beautiful. I'm trying to give it the Martin Parr twist. Otherwise, what's the point of me doing it? But in order to do that, I get paid a lot of money. And that's really a bribe that people put to me, in order for me to make things look beautiful. So I guess you could say that's very unprincipled of me, really, but there's no question that the fashion pictures I do are more beautiful than the pictures of ordinary things that I do. But as I say, I still try and make it, a little bit subversion into the imagery in order to give it the Parr effect. Otherwise, what's the point? There'd be no point in me doing it. But yes, I take your point. I think it is getting more difficult to take beauty, certainly from the sort of range of professional photographers. Looking at the pictures here in the exhibition, there's a lot of beautiful pictures, especially from the amateur photographers. I'm sorry if I sound as if I'm biased against amateurs, because amateurs means they're doing it for the love of it, so I'm right behind them for that reason alone. But there are, I guess, certain cliches, originating from the camera club world, which you see overspilling into a festival like this, which is not a bad thing, because it's great to see a range of images and approaches and situations which photographs have been taken. Is that it? Oh, here we are, look. Just in the front here.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, it's a question you probably get quite often, but you mentioned earlier that in earlier days, no one bat an eye if you were taking pictures of their children or up close. But I can imagine that nowadays it's a lot more difficult to approach people or to get permission, so to say, to take their picture. So I was wondering how you go about and really interact with people or get them to feel comfortable to get their picture taken.
No, you're absolutely right. There's no doubt that it's probably a bit more difficult to photograph in a public place now, especially with a big camera, than it was back in the day. But still, I don't know what the law is in Belgium, but in England or Britain, if you take a picture in a public place, you can do anything you like with it, as long as you don't use it for advertising purposes. So you can publish it, you can exhibit it quite legally. But of course, as you go around people, you'll always find that one person in 500 is probably a couple of you in the room today who absolutely, cringe when they see a photographer and they put their arms like this and they come over to you and say, you can't take pictures, it's against the law, which it isn't. So yeah, it's basically an occupational hazard that us photographers have to put up with. And one of the great advantages of the iPhone and the cameras on that, you can use them and they're not as threatening because everyone's got phones out all the time, especially if you go to something like a party or even a fashion location, or a tourist location. So, I gather, this new iPhone 15, the camera on it is sensational. So it may come to a point where I have to ditch my DSLR and go to a serious iPhone as the cameras get better and better. So who knows what's going to happen? And I suspect also that the laws may change. What is the law in Belgium? Can you photograph anyone in the public domain? Does anyone know?
I think it might also be different if you focus on one singular person, because then it becomes something of portrait, right? But if it's like many different people at once, it might be a different kind of...
I know the laws in France because I photograph a lot in France, and that's the case there. But if you photograph one person in a public place, could you get a legal, antidote to that in a Belgian court? What do you think? It's interesting that no one knows what the law is in photography in Belgium, because I assume there's a lot of photographers from Belgium in the room, and no one knows. Okay.
I think
it's a mystery, therefore.
No, I think if the person does not object when you take the picture, then it's okay. But when
the picture's published, could they object? Yes? Okay. Interesting.
Hi, Martin. I'm back up here.
Where are you? At the top?
Yeah,
Oh, yes. Okay.
I'm
Hello.
on top.
Yeah, it's a very productive area up there. You've got.
Yeah, it's great here. What are your thoughts about AI? And someone can copy your style without knowing of your agreement or not. What do you think about that?
I'm not as threatened by AI as a lot of people seem to be. I do understand that, the world of photography might change quite dramatically with the application of this. But what you can never get in AI, I imagine, however sophisticated it gets, is the actual quirks of the brilliant photographers that we all know and love. If you think of Salgado, you think of, let me think, I don't know. You name any photographer that we love, they have quirks which are almost irreplaceable with computer intelligence. So I don't feel that threatened by AI, but I do accept that it's going to have an effect, especially in the sort of lower streams of photography, like all these people have to churn out hundreds of pictures for catalogues. That may well be something where the photographers will lose out. But I think there will be a time when, like in an exhibition, for example, in the show here, do you actually have to say if it's an AI picture, Karin?
No.
So,
until now, not, but maybe in the future, yes.
I think in Magnum, we had this discussion 15 years ago when Photoshop came around, and we decided then that anything that is Photoshopped has to be declared as such, and I think the same will happen with AI. Mm-hmm. But I imagine, Magnum photographers, for example, are going to be the last people that would actually employ AI because they want to keep the thing that makes them recognized as a photographer, the individual voice that they spent years to create. And this can't ultimately be replicated. You could have very Parr-esque type pictures. You could scan a whole load of my pictures and put them in, but I still don't think they would get the real quirks of how I try to photograph. But I could be wrong. Let's see. It's early days, isn't it? It's only in the last year this whole heated question of AI has really emerged, like it did with Photoshop 15 years ago.
Yeah, we had a debate about it.
Last
Wednesday.
Yeah. And I'm going to a 2-day conference on it, held at the Royal Photographic Society in October, in fact. So yes, it's going to be greatly discussed, and let's see how it emerges, because it will be different in 20 years' time.
I think
I'll be dead by the way by then. I expect.
Still think AI can't put a feeling in a picture like
Sorry?
human. I still think AI can't put the feeling in a picture like we humans can.
Really? Looking at the AI, I've gone around the shows here today, and there's a particular exhibition about Serbia where there was AI and ordinary pictures. The AI pictures, I could tell them immediately. You know, they just sprung out as being unreal, unnatural. So at the moment, I feel confident I can recognize an AI picture when I see it. I mean, come the day when that won't be the case. And they had this famous story with the Sony Photography Awards when one of the people who won an award then declared himself to be an AI photographer, and therefore the prize was taken away from him. But he got the publicity he wanted about the whole AI issue, because it came out as a big debate. This is in last May in the UK, where they have these Sony Awards.
Yeah, Boris Eldrickson.
There you go, you know the name of the photographer.
Yeah. Thank you.
Was he Belgian?
No, German.
All right, okay. Enough said.
But he wanted to take part at a debate,
Yes.
but he had two debates at the same time.
And you told me today that he wouldn't attend by Zoom your AI discussion because he's already booked for another. So he's obviously got a whole lifetime ahead of him of talking about AI.
Yeah.
It looks like...
Yeah.
Oh, hang on, we have
Hello.
one. Hello.
I didn't know your work, so I'm glad I came. I really liked your pictures, but the most pictures I've seen is from older days, and there's some nostalgic to it. And probably that's why a lot of people like those pictures. But I was wondering, you were speaking about your Martin Parr twist. What's your Martin Parr twist? And how and
I'm not going to reveal the secrets here and
but
now in front of 200 Belgian photographers.
Because I think if you look at nowadays pictures, they're quite, the way we see the world now, but especially the nostalgic ones are appreciated for their period of time. And back in those days that you started to photography, how and why did you become famous?
Well, answering your first question, I think we can look back at the pictures I've shown today, many of which are 30, 40 years old, and therefore are basically nostalgic anyway, because they're taken in the past, so things look different. But for example, back in the 80s, photographing in supermarkets was regarded as quite radical. I mean, I could have actually produced more pictures showing, like for example, the smartphone. I had to do something about that because it's such a big part of our lives. And already, as I've mentioned, the selfie stick has disappeared, but still people take selfies, but the stick's gone. So I'm glad that I've got pictures of people using the stick 10, 15 years ago, but at the time that was a modern innovation. So I'm trying to basically protect myself here and say that I don't think all the pictures I do are ultimately nostalgic. But I could be wrong. But I mean, when I see something that's happening like Blockbuster Video, do you remember them? They used to be the chain store that hired out tapes for people to watch. I photographed that about 5 years before they went, because I knew that in 20 years' time, all Blockbuster Video shops will have gone. So in a sense, is that nostalgic? I think that's being, trying to think of something that's going to disappear and photographing it while it's still around. And what was your other question, by the way? Was it a two-part question? Oh, how I became famous. Oh, right, okay. Well, I guess I have to confess, it's the production of the Last Resort pictures, which are the ones that you see here, 35 years after they were taken. That was taken to the Arles Festival in 1986 by my friend François Habel, who was the director. And that really, I guess, was my international breakthrough, because those same pictures were then traveled to Germany, to other places, and they were bought by cultural centers in France. So I think that exhibition had a big impact. And it's still, even though it was taken so long ago, it's still the book that sells the most and the thing that people remember me for. So I'm delighted to show these pictures here in the festival, even though they were taken so long ago. So yes, I think it was that. It's a gradual process, the whole thing of becoming known. I mean, when I started out in photography, I had no perception of trying to be famous or anything. I just wanted to do the pictures because I'm obsessed, you know. I think every day about photography. I go out most days and photograph. So, you know, I'm as excited now by the whole process of photography as I was back in the, you know, when I was in my early 20s. And every day you think, maybe this day I might get a good picture, because good pictures are so scarce. And let me tell you, here and now, I probably take more bad pictures than anyone else in this room, because if you went out and said, I'm just going to take good pictures today, you would never start. So you've got to be, you know, you've got to have the momentum, you've got to discover an event or a situation that you really are inspired by, and then you can start taking pictures that ultimately may mean something. But if I get 10 good pictures a year, I think it's a pretty good year. And if I think about that, that means I've taken 530 good pictures. That almost sounds like bragging, if you know what I mean. So please keep taking the bad pictures. That's my last final tip to you all.
Thank you very much, Martin, for this wonderful talk.
Yes, of course. I've got my pen ready. I thought this might happen.
Ja. En wie nog een boek wil
turn this
bestellen,
off.
boek bestellen kan ook nog via de foundation. We hebben er geen hier, maar via de foundation is het altijd mogelijk nog boeken te bestellen die gesigneerd toegestuurd worden.
Hi there. All right.